play button at the top. So I'm going to try that a little bit. And so one thing you might notice as you're changing numbers is actually the URL is changing a little bit. And it's actually a really long URL. And the reason that it's so long is that the code that's on the screen is getting saved into the URL in an encoded format. And so actually what you can do is if you find something that you like, you can copy the URL and then you'll have that saved. So for example, this sketch that I'm making right now, oops, wow, it got really long here. I didn't correctly save it. Let me try again. So, I'm going to try copying the URL again and putting it here. So now this link, if you click on it, it will directly open the sketch that I was just working on. It still says by Richie up here, who is someone in the Hydra community who's made this sketch for people to kind of learn from. But what I could do is say, add my name here and say remix by Olivia. Which brings me to another thing, which is that all of the text on here is code that the computer receives as sort of an instruction to decide how to render the visuals that are behind it. But any line that starts with these slashes is what's called the comment. And so the comment, the computer will just ignore those things. And so for the comment, when there's a comment, you can kind of just add notes or text into the comments. And so anything that has this 2 slashes will become a comment. Oops, I just messed something up there. So I'm going to go back. And feel free, if you have questions at any point, those who are in the webinar, feel free to just type them into the chat. And yeah, if I miss a comment, hosts, feel free to alert my attention to the chat, because I want to make sure people are able to follow along with what I'm saying. Yeah, so if you have any questions, feel free to write them right now. And so basically here we have this text that's generating the visual behind it. We can share, if you make a sketch here, you can share it with other people. And there was a question here, who are the artists who created these visuals? So there are people all over the world who, once I shared this online, started using it. And once more and more people started using Hydra, I asked members of the community or people who had been using Hydra in different places if they wanted to share an example for other people to learn from. And so some people added, for example, their Instagram or some other social media handle in their comments. And this sketch that I started from is by someone named Richie, who's actually a high school student in Argentina, and he's really active in helping organize events and stuff like that. But there's people in different parts of the world using it. Yeah, that was a great question. So now what I'm actually going to do, because a perfectly valid way of using something like this is just trying things out and seeing what happens. But some people like to start with understanding a bit more of what's happening. And so what I'm going to do now is explain a bit more of how different pieces of this work. So you have a little bit of a better idea of what's going on. And so what I'm going to do right now is press this trash can button in the top right. And what that does is it clears everything. And you can see just this comment at the top with some instructions. And so I want to back up a little bit and explain that kind of the basic idea of how Hydra works. And that is that it's inspired by analog modular video synthesis. And so the idea is that you have little pieces or modules that you can mix together or patch together in different combinations, and the order that you put things together creates the visual that you see at the end. And so just a little bit about that. This picture here is an example of an analog modular video synthesizer. And this actual one it's called the Sandine image processor, and it was created in the 1970s by Dan Sandine at the Art Institute of Chicago. But the basic idea is actually very similar to modular audio synthesizers as well. The idea being that you have all these little boxes, and each of these boxes either generates a signal or it transforms an existing signal. And when that signal gets to the screen, it turns into a pattern that changes colors as it's read across the screen. And so that signal is actually changing voltages over time. And if you use it in audio, basically those changes in voltages, when they get to a speaker, it turns into vibrations of a speaker. In the case of video, when it gets to the TV screen, it's read across the screen, and then it generates a pattern. And for me, actually, when I made Hydra, I was very interested in this idea, but I had never actually used a video synthesizer, and it can be quite expensive and time consuming to either buy one or build one. And so actually what I did was I just watched videos about modular video synthesis, and then I wrote code to replicate that idea, but in the browser. And it's not at all a faithful, like accurate representation of a video synthesizer, but it mostly borrows from this idea that you can sort of mix and match things together, and the order that you connect them together generates what you get as the output. So going back to my empty editor here, which again, you can get to the empty editor by clicking on the trash can. So back on the empty editor here, I'm going to delete this code that's here. And in order to kind of start off, one of the kind of base units or base modules of things within Hydra is something called an oscillator. And to make an oscillator, you type basically the letters OSC in parentheses. And this word is basically the equivalent to one of these little boxes here. So I can type OSC, and then I'll press the triangle, and it runs that code. And you might see, oh, nothing's changed on the screen. And that's because typing OSC here, it's basically the equivalent of like turning one of those modules on, but I haven't actually connected it to the screen yet, so we can't see anything. And so the way we connect it to the screen is typing .out. And then I can run the code again. And then you see this, these stripy things in the background that can make you a bit dizzy. Oh, one thing I should mention, in addition to like actually using the buttons here, you can actually type Control-Shift-Enter, and that will also run the code. And there's a bunch of different key commands in Hydra that once you start using them more and more, it makes it sometimes easier to just type in key commands if you're already typing stuff out. And I see that there's 2 questions, but I'm going to keep, I'm going to finish this introduction, and then after I will address the 2 questions, but feel free to keep typing questions as they occur to you. So now I have an oscillator, it's connected to the output, but I can also change different parameters of the oscillator. So let's say here I'm going to type a 10 in the beginning, and now I have a lower frequency oscillator. And basically you can think of the numbers in parentheses or the parameters of each function as like turning a knob. So similar to with the modular synthesizer thing, you could turn a knob to change different parameters of it. And so in coding or computer concepts, this word with the parentheses after it is called a function. And the function has different parameters, which is like the little knobs of it. So you can change aspects of the function. So here I put the 10, and then I did Control-Shift-Enter to run the code. And then I could change different parameters. This one makes it move faster or slower across the screen. This last one changes how colorful it is. And so basically low number is no color, and then higher number is rainbow, or gets a lot more colorful, like if I did 1.8 here. And then this period, it's like a patch cable that's connecting it to the output. And so now I have basically like one function or module or little box of the video synthesizer connected to the output. But let's say I want to add another transformation to this signal. I could, for example, add a rotation here. So now what I had before is rotating. Maybe I want to like go back and tone down the color a little bit. So I tone down the color a bit. I could keep adding transformations after that. So now I could add a kaleidoscope. I could repeat this. I could also change the colors of this. And basically infinitely keep adding different things that change what's here. And then I can also change different parameters of these different functions. And I'll show you a second where you can kind of look up all the different functions. But let's say here I could, maybe I want to repeat it 100 times instead of just 3 times. So then it becomes more this texture. Or maybe 100 is too much. I'll go back to 10. And maybe I want to make it move a bit faster, or maybe that's too fast. But I'll have it rotate a bit faster. Let's see. So you can keep adding things that way. Now what I'll do is I'll share this sketch also here. Rotating oscillator. And so you can also, if you want to play around with that sketch, you could click on this link. And if you do make something that you like as you're following along, feel free to share the link to it in the chat. And another thing, if you make something you like and you want to save an image of it, you can press Control-Shift-S, and then you see it downloads an image of what I just made. And so now, actually, this is making me a bit dizzy, so I'm going to make it a bit slower. Let me see. And so that's basically the basics of Hydra, is that it's inspired by analog modular video synthesis. You start with kind of one source and you modulate it, or you transform it by adding different things like rotate and kaleidoscope and repeat. But it gets a lot more complicated once you start combining lots of different sources together. And so there was a question that was, is there any way of combining different visuals already created by other artists and have a whole new one? And that's definitely true. So you can kind of like blend two different things together, or you can, what I will go into a bit later is different ways of blending different things together or mixing them together. And another thing in Hydra is that you can use external sources. So you can use, for example, a live video stream. You could use a screen share from another application. You could use a video or an image. And you can also mix, this is all running in JavaScript and running in the browser. So if you like use JavaScript for other things, you could also mix HTML canvas with other graphics. You could use that as a source into Hydra. I'm going to show that in a little bit. But before I do that, I will show you where you can access kind of the list of all these functions in case you want to try other ones. And so if you go to this question mark, it brings back up this box with the information. If you scroll down, there's this, there's a lot of different resources, but this list of Hydra functions, if you click on it, it shows basically all the different words that Hydra understands. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this link into the this as well. So Hydra functions, and you can think of it as sort of like a spell book of these are the words that the computer understands. And I do sometimes like to think of coding languages as almost like a set of spells, because it's basically words that when you use them, the computer understands them in a certain way and reacts in a certain way. And sometimes it can feel a bit magical. But it also depends on like, oh, you have to do this in the exact right order, or if you don't, it'll have a different effect that wasn't exactly what you intended. And so if you click on, for example, these different functions, and it's a bit big here, so yeah, I'll make it smaller. If you click on one of these words, it shows an example of how to use it, or multiple examples, and it also shows what the different parameters are and their default values. And so you can go ahead to click on these different things, and it will load the different functions. Yeah, this way you could load different things. And for now, kind of things that we've covered are this source function. And then, so it always starts with a source function. So one of these things, and then follows it with a geometry function that transforms that source, or a color function. And so the geometry functions kind of change basically the geometry or positioning of things. And then the color functions change the colors. And I'll get more into how you do more complicated things like blending in a bit. So going back here to the editor, here, I'll close this. And I want to show you quickly how to use external sources. And so I mentioned that you could use a camera or a screen share or different things as a source into it. And so basically, the way to connect external sources is by typing this line of code, which is s0.init cam. And I'm going to explain a little bit what the pieces of this are. So S0 is a variable, and you can think of it like a slot for connecting the different external things. And so anytime you want to use an external source, you have to do kind of initialize it or connect it to the system. And there's 4 different slots for doing that. And they have the names S0, S1, S2, and S3. So you can connect 4 different kind of external slots at once. And so when I run this code, it asks me permission to use the camera. So I give it permission. And now, like, nothing actually changed, but the camera light on my computer turned on. And so basically now my camera's connected, but I'm not actually using it in anything. And so in order to see the camera on the screen, I actually have to use it and connect it to the output. So let's say in order to use it, I type this function src, and I just got rid of what was there before. And in parentheses, I put S0 because that's the slot that I'm using for this particular webcam. And then I type out. In this case, it's getting the wrong webcam for me. So I guess my default webcam is this like OBS thing, but I could actually change the webcam that it's using by putting a number in this init cam. So let's see what happens. Oh yeah. So now it's using actually, I guess, oh yeah, it's using my computer webcam. Let's see if I have another one here. Nope, I guess not. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to that one. Oops. There it is. Okay. And so just like with the oscillator, how we could transform things about it, I can now, starting with the camera, I could, for example, change the colors of it. So here I do this, and now I have like different colors. I could rotate it. Let's see. Ooh, that was fast. Let me slow down. I could rotate it. I could pixelate it, for example. I could keep doing different things to the camera. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to share this code also in the document. And so again, if something's not working or you get a bit like go off in a different direction, you can always come here and click on these different links that I'm sharing in order to then open the editor with the same code in it. And let's see, what if I change the color a bit again, or I could also repeat everything, have a bunch of myself, feed into my narcissism a bit. So one thing I haven't mentioned yet is, let's say you're typing something and it doesn't seem to work. So let's say instead of source, if I typed Olivia or something here and I ran it, and then nothing actually changed, but you might see down at the bottom, there's this, it's a little hard because it's pink to see. Let me see if no, oh yeah. So you'll see this text at the bottom, and that says Olivia is not defined. And that basically means the computer didn't understand what it was I was typing. So if I type anything that's not in that function list, the computer tries to communicate to me that it wasn't understanding what I was saying. So the blah blah word is not defined basically means the computer saying, I don't understand what you're trying to say. And it tries to give a little hint about what it is. So now I'll type, oh wait, I did this wrong. I'll go back to the camera source. And now it is understanding what I was saying. Yeah, any questions specifically about what I'm showing you right now? There's the more broader questions I will go to a bit later. But let me know if you have specific questions about using the camera in Hydra. So one thing you might wonder is like, well, why is OSC the word for oscillator? Who made that up? Is that a real, like, what is that? Or why, if I type, for example, OSC 10 and then put out, it has 2 stripes on the screen instead of 10. And the answer is just, it is that way because I made it that way. And I am mentioning this because I think a lot of times with programming, it feels like there's some like, oh, it's this way because the computer is so complicated and it has to, like there's some logical reason for everything, but actually any programming language is just sort of made up by a person who at some point just decided the word for this thing is going to be this way and the word for this other thing is going to be this way. And what happened with Hydra is I started making it and it was just some different ideas I had and I used it in a workshop and put it online and then people started using it. And so now, for example, I might be interested in changing this, like the way that the oscillator works, but now lots of people use it. And so it makes more sense to leave it how it is, at least for the time being. And so the answer to some of these questions of like, why is this way, is just, it's that way because I made it that way. And I just like to point that out because I think a lot of software, it's just people, it's actually human beings who made these things. And any software, it's just using other language that someone else has made that's based on some other language that someone else has made, all the way down until it gets to this like computer chip and ones and zeros and stuff. So how there was a question, how many users does Hydra have at this point? And I have no idea, but definitely like in the thousands or more. And at the end, I'm going to talk a bit more about the community aspect of it. So going back a bit to this camera thing, I'm gonna show the camera again. So we'll go. Wanted to mention that just like you can have different sources in Hydra, you can also have different outputs. And then it gets really kind of exciting when you can mix all those outputs into each other. And so right now we're just seeing one of the outputs, and these are just virtual outputs, like sort of things that you can mix and match within the actual software of Hydra. So here we're just seeing one of the virtual outputs. And by default, actually the name of that output is O0. And so just like the sources have the names S0, S1, S2, S3, the outputs have the names O0, O1, O2, O3. And so what I can do is actually, if I want to see all of the outputs at once, there's this function render that I can type. And now the screen is split into a grid. And right now, only the top left has something happening in it because I'm only using the one of the outputs. And so what I can do is I could, let's say I want to send something else to a different a different output, I could do this, do this and say out and set it to 01. And so now when I run this function, you can see there's an oscillator at the bottom and a camera at the top. And I'm going to share this code, and actually I'm going to re-add the camera initialization code just so it will work if you open the link. And basically, once you run the initialization code, then you don't have to run it again. So you could also delete it from the screen, but just for the sake of sharing this link, I added it back in here. So there's that link. And again, in the way to see this for window is with this render function. And if there's nothing in parentheses, then it splits the screen in four like this. But if I type something in parentheses, in this case, 00, it just shows the camera. Or if I type 01, it just shows the oscillator, which was what was on 01. So now I'll go back to the grid of 4. And the way things are named, it's like the top left is 00, the bottom left is 01, the top right is 02, the bottom right is 03. So then what I could do is blend these things together. So I could say start with 00 and then blend it with 01 and then send it out to 02. And so when I do that, it's blending the colors of these two things together and sending it to the top right. So it's saying start with this thing in the top left, blend it with this thing down here, and then put it here in the top right. And if I change one of these like this, like add a rotate to the oscillator, then it also affects what's on the top right. And so I'm going to also share this link. And if you go to the Hydra Functions list, all the different like ways of blending things, you could see in this blend section, basically. And so like blending is basically taking the average of the two colors. And there's actually a second parameter, which is how much to blend between the two things. So if I put 0, it's only showing the initial thing. And if I put 1,
Didn't get that.
oops. If I put 1, it's only showing the second thing. And if I put like something in between, like in this case, 0.7, it's showing both of them together. And so all of the blend functions, what they do is they combine the colors of two things. But there's another set of functions that's really inspired by analog video synthesis. And what it does is instead of blending the colors of two things, it uses the colors of one thing to modulate or warp the geometry of the other thing, which might sound kind of confusing, but once I show it, maybe it's a bit more clear. So what I could do here is instead of blending, I could use this function modulate. And so now you'll see, I'm going to actually turn it down a little bit. Now what you'll see is my face is being warped by this like black and white thing that's in the bottom left. So it's starting with the camera in the top left, and then it's using this oscillator thing to warp it, and then it's sending it out to 02, which is the top right. And so I could also, actually, I'm going to take out the rotation right now. So maybe it's a little bit clearer what's happening. I could also here change the amount of the modulation. So now it's warping it a lot more. And again, if I, for example, edit or this, for now I pixelated it, for example, then it changes the way that it modulates it. So basically, a little bit more technically, what it's doing is it starts with this top image and it goes pixel by pixel. And then it looks at what color is in the bottom image. And it takes the red and green channels of that. And the amount of red, which in this case, when it's white, it's like fully turned on, like the red, green, and blue channels are fully turned on. And then when it's dark, there's none of the colors are turned on, basically. And so basically in the white parts of this, it's displacing the image more. In the dark parts, it's not displacing the image. And so that lets you do like really trippy things. Trippy selfies, as someone mentioned in the comments. And so now what we've just seen are these also modulate functions, and you can get a lot more complicated by sort of modulating other parameters, not just the position in X, Y, but also kind of this, how pixelated it is, or the scale of it. And so there's a lot more examples here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to share this link also in the in this chat. I mean, in the Riseup Pad. Any questions about the, like specifically about the blending and modulation and multiple outputs thing? This is definitely a lot of information, and especially if it's your first time seeing all of this, like don't be worried if it seems a lot at once. And that's also what's nice about having this recorded. So if you want to follow along later and go a bit slower, you can. And also if you want to look at just go to any of the links, you can kind of revisit what we were doing. And so let's say, let's say I just want to look at my kind of camera output. So in that case, I'm going to slow it down a little bit. Or actually, I want to mention one other way of slowing things down. You can either like individually change the parameters of the functions, but there's also this global thing called speed, that you could change the speed of everything. So I could like, now it's like really slow. Let's say I like just, everything got too fast and I wanted to like slow everything down, I could do this speed thing. And so here, I'm rendering the camera to one output and this oscillator to the other output, and then I'm using one output to warp the other or modulate the other. But in this case, I actually don't need to render these things to different outputs. I could also do this all just within one function. And so what I'm actually going to do is I'll clear mostly what's here. And I'll go back to just rendering the initial one, which is O0. And you'll notice I took away the code, but the visuals stayed the same. And that's basically because the computer only receives commands when you run them. And until you kind of replace something that's on one screen, it will always still stay there. And so one way of actually getting rid of everything if you is if you do hush, and that clears the screen. There was a question, do I live code in performances with sound? And so live coding is kind of this idea of typing code live as a performance to either generate audio or visuals or both. Personally, I mostly collaborate with musicians, and I do live video along with musicians, but a lot of people, some people also write code to generate music live. And there's a few different languages that people use to do that. And when in the second half, I'm going to talk a bit more about like ways of collaborating with this online and in person, and especially kind of collaborating with people who use audio or doing both things yourself. So I will talk a little bit more about that and different languages that you can use to do that. And so here I have this, I'm back to kind of my blank canvas. And let's say I want to, I'm going to initialize the camera again, which it is actually still initialized in the background, but just so all the code is here. And so now what I want to do is, let's say I start with the camera and I want to do what I did before of using an oscillator to modulate it, but I'm showing a sort of different way of doing it. And that is that I could do it all sort of together, just using one line of code. And so now I'm starting with the camera and I'm using this oscillator to warp it, but I'm actually just doing it all in one line, and I can still, I don't know, I could still change the colors again, and add different transformations here, or I could do things to just the oscillator, like I could, it's hard to see that exactly. Maybe if I pixelate it again, it will be more clear. So I can, just like I was doing before, I can kind of blend and modulate things together. But a kind of more straightforward way of doing it is just doing it all in one output. But sometimes, like depending on how you're setting up a performance or something, you might want to have different things on different outputs and then fade between them, or there's a lot of different ways to use these different things. So there's just a lot of different options. And the one last thing I want to talk a little bit about is the concept of video feedback. And so if you work with audio, you might be familiar with sort of audio feedback. It gets used in like delays or reverbs or all sorts of different things, or when you accidentally connect things wrong. And in video, there is this same sort of idea of feedback. And in a sort of analog way, you can think of it as when a camera is pointed at its own screen. And my external webcam is not actually working today, so I won't demonstrate it at this moment. But yeah, if you have an external webcam and you have the camera on the screen, you can then point that camera back at its own image, and it starts doing these like trippy things that look sort of like an infinite mirror. Or if you're ever somewhere and you have two mirrors that are facing each other and you can see everything go off infinitely, that's very similar to video feedback, or the output of something becoming the source, becoming the output again. And that's a technique that has been used a lot in video art in like the 70s and 80s. And it also comes into play into a lot of visuals now that have more like kind of like fluidy or glitchy sorts of effects. One way of doing that is using these sorts of feedback techniques. And so I'm just going to show that quickly here. So here, I'm going to get rid of these effects. Actually, wait, before I do that, I'm going to save this so you could also look at this. in the chat. So this example, again, it's also showing modulation, and it's basically the same as this earlier example, but the earlier example uses multiple buffers to do it, and this way of modulating or warping something just uses one buffer. And so something we have here is we have this camera. So I'm going to get rid of this effect and just show the output. And so there you see my camera. And one thing, and again, when I don't put anything in this parentheses, it's actually going to this output called O0. So this is the same as not putting anything in parentheses. But what I could also do here is blend this output with itself. And so if I do this blend O0, basically I'm starting with the camera and I'm blending it with the output of the last render. And then it's going to the output. And it basically looks exactly the same. And that's because like it might look a little bit more blurry. It's basically adding sort of a like trace to it, but mostly it looks exactly the same. But again, this blend parameter has, I could have a different parameter, a second parameter here of how much to only show the original camera or how much to only show kind of the previous render. And so let's say I put 1 here. So I'm only going to show the previous render. What ends up happening is it freezes. It freezes my camera how it was before. And if I put 0, then it only shows the earlier camera. But let's say now I put, instead of 0 or 1, I put 0.9. Then maybe it's, I don't know how well you see it in the video, but it starts to do this kind of like trail or ghosting thing. I could increase it more and then it becomes even much more ghost-like. And so what I can also do is start adding different effects into this. So let's say into this feedback loop. So let's say I add like more saturation or something, which is like making it more colorful. So now I'm still doing the same thing where I'm just blending the camera, but I'm like making it more saturated each time. Maybe that's a little too much, so I'll do it less. And maybe I'll bring this blending down a little bit. So see more, and like the feedback can be really sensitive. So anything that you like adjust, often just very small adjustments will like really affect what's happening. So I could also do something like make it bigger each time. So if I like, let's see, like that. Now, now it does this like infinite zoomy thing. And maybe instead of changing the saturation, I'll change the contrast here. Okay. Yeah, it's still quite saturated. I could make it not zoom quite so much, like maybe I'll just do this. So now it's like yeah, and so you can see I'm just very like slightly tweaking the numbers and it really changes everything. And I could also do this modulate thing where I use one thing to warp another thing. And so I could actually use the same output to also warp the image, which gets a bit trippy. So I'm only going to do a little bit. Let's see. So now it creates this kind of like glitchy, liquidy thing. Maybe I'll even turn that down a bit. Let's see. And let's see, there's this other function, colorama, that makes everything really colorful. Woo. And so now it gets a bit wild because the colors are affecting the position. And so as the colors are changing, it's like pushing the different pixels in different directions. And I still have my camera here. I'm gonna get rid of the scale. So maybe it'll move a little bit less. And yeah, you can get kind of really wild things there. So I'm gonna share that in the chat. I mean, in the Riseup Pad. Yeah, if you just came now, or more recently, all the things that I've been showing, I'm also sharing into this Riseup Pad that's shared in the chat. And so this is like a rainbow. Yeah, that got a bit wild. So I could also like blend the camera in a little bit more. So now it's still the camera, but it's like also rainbow on the sides. Any questions about this so far? Usually when I'm doing in-person workshops, like by now everyone's a bit hypnotized by their own screen. And so like no one responds and everyone's just like kind of having colors going on. And so sometimes it's nice to also see what other people have done. And so feel free if you make something that you like, feel free to share it in the chat or add it to the pad. Okay, so and I see a comment, loving the spells and magic analogy and how it really complements the interface and using the software. Yeah, I really like that, really resonates with me as an approach to programming in a lot of different levels, both like in terms of the language aspect of it and also like building up these different like sources of knowledge and then sharing them with people and like creating things. Oh, this is great. Someone shared a code in the chat. So if it's okay with you, I will share it also on the screen. Let's see. So I'm going to copy that and paste it. And it might look different depending on your camera and the lighting where you are and everything like that. Yeah. And I'm gonna go back. Oh, so this was Mara's sketch with the camera. That looks great. Thank you for sharing. I'm gonna go back oops. Oh, I'm gonna go back to this colorful thing. Or actually chill it out a little bit more again. Let's see. And I want to show one more kind of code thing and then talk a bit more broadly and also about other tools for collaborating and stuff like that. And the one other thing that I want to show is how to add sort of like interactivity, either with the mouse or with the MIDI controller or using or responding to audio. And so I don't think I mentioned this before, but Hydra is written in JavaScript, which is a programming language that's often used for things on the web. And actually this editor is just a JavaScript editor. And so any JavaScript code will also work in this editor. Although Hydra kind of has its own syntax and way of doing things. And so one thing I want to mention is that anything here that is a number, it can also be a function. And the function can represent something that changes over time. And so anything that could be a number could also be a function. And so let's say this like contrast function, let's say instead of it having just be one number, one thing I could do is have it be a number that changes over time. And the way that I do that is by adding an array or a list of numbers. And so I could do, like, let's say I want it to change from like 0.5 to 1 to 1.5. So we'll see what happens when I do this. Oh, that got wild. Okay. Yeah, maybe I'm going to simplify this a little bit so it doesn't. Well, there we can actually see it's going from it's cycling through these different numbers and it's having kind of this really big effect. Yeah, so maybe that's a big, I'm changing it a lot. So maybe I'll just go like 0.8 point. And so now it's cycling through the values of that. And then I could make it go faster. So like I could make it go a lot faster, cycle through them. So now it's cycling through them. It's supposed to be actually, it's supposed to go at 1 thing per second when it's at 1, but I think because I changed the speed earlier, that's why it was like going a lot slower. So anyways, I could change the values over time by adding this list or array of different numbers. But I could also have a parameter correspond to something like the mouse or sound. And so here, let's say I want the contrast to correspond to the X position of the mouse. And so the way that I do that is I type it like this little bubbly thing with an arrow, or it's parentheses, then equal, and then triangle bracket. That's like this arrow thing was kind of weird. And then I type mouse here. And so now, let's see. Woo, that got really contrasty. And the reason is that it's using the pixel coordinates. And so instead of going from like 0 to 1, it's going from like, it's going to like 1,000 or however, whatever the resolution of my screen is. So I could actually divide this by 1,000. And so now when I move the mouse, it's changing the contrast. Actually, it's kind of hard to see because it just looks gray. So maybe I'm going to make it change the saturation instead. So now it's like, I'm going to change this a bit more. Okay. So now when my mouse is over to the left, it's black and white. And as I move my mouse across the screen, it gets more colorful. So like this. And because the color is also controlling a bit the movement, then it also means that it moves more when I move my mouse. So I'm going to show this sketch. Also, and so often, sometimes when I do live visuals, I use a MIDI controller with sliders, and then the sliders become different variables in the code. And so then I use the sliders like in addition to the code so that I can like fade in and out of different things more immediately. And for myself, the code is really good for kind of high level, like setting up a patch, if you will. And then I also like this like finer control with knobs and stuff for live performances. And so that's all I wanted to share kind of about the code part of Hydra. And there's like a whole world of different things to dive into with it. And if you're interested, there's in this kind of question mark, there's a lot of different resources. And definitely the Discord server has a forum where people will help with a lot of things. There's a lot more different tutorials and examples. I think a large part of the Hydra community is Spanish speaking. So there's also especially a lot of resources in Spanish and less so in other languages, but also Japanese and French and different languages as well in terms of documentation. And so now I want to move on a bit. Feel free if you have questions also about code. I don't want to jump too fast, so feel free also to ask questions if you have them in the chat. And I mentioned a little bit at the beginning about how these sketches are made by different people in the community. And one thing for me that's been really amazing to see with this, as well as a few other things that I've shared online, is kind of how once people start using something, then it sort of takes on its own life in terms of like the directions that people take it. And sometimes that's almost been hard for me because I felt like, oh, this is like my project and I want to control how people like perceive it or understand it or something. And then because I think for a lot of reasons, because it's quite easy to use and there were a lot of people interested in it, it like very immediately, people were very immediately like doing their own workshops of Hydra or presenting it in different ways and kind of like taking it in different directions. And so I had to let go a little bit of some of the control that I had initially. But another thing I also saw happen is that software went from being this sort of technical thing of how do I solve this problem to this also kind of social thing of like, how does someone engage with this when they first come here, or how can people share things with each other? And so like, I think since I first made this about almost 4 years ago now, I've met so many people through it. And yeah, I think it's constantly also evolving in ways that I didn't expect. Yeah, and sort of an example of this, like a technical thing becoming a more community thing, is just like a very concrete example is like when you load the editor, you don't just see this blank thing where you don't know what to do, but you see like this code that other people have written and that you can edit and write something as well. And so that is sort of a specific decision of like, okay, there's lots of people involved in this in different ways. And yeah, I think sometimes with coding, there's this like myth of like some like genius, often male, who just like was born barfing out code from the terminal and like has a genius. Yeah, the myth of like the code genius who could just do everything without like basing it on the work of other people. And so I don't think there's always an answer to that in the creative community in terms of how do lots of people's work fit into each other. But some aspects of sharing the code or sharing the code as part of a performance is like transparency around like, this is what I'm doing and this is what I'm sharing with you. And so feel free to ask questions about that as well. And one thing that we started doing during the pandemic was having online meetups. And actually it was this Richie, the person whose sketch I showed at the beginning, who's a high school student in Argentina, who's really excited about Hydra and has written some tutorials and stuff. And he wanted to start having the meetups. And I really appreciated that because it sort of also pushed me to do this. And so we started making websites, and anyone who's using Hydra could join and do a show and tell during the meetup. And we kind of made this, like when people sign up on a Google sheet, then it adds their name or what they want to share to this like web page, and then you can kind of click through different projects that people have made. And so this is Lupita Quispe, who's an artist in Ecuador, and she shared, like she made this website using Hydra. And so during the meetup, she shared kind of what she did with that. Yeah, I'm not sure if you can see the Hydra part right this second. But then also kind of flip through different people just kind of share different little websites that they've made or different performances that they've done with Hydra. And so making this little website was a way to kind of meet somewhere that wasn't an existing social network, and allow people to share. Even this, you can see it was almost 80 people. So it's a lot of people to have in one call, sharing different things. But by sharing the links in this way, then people could kind of see what other people are working on. And actually this is perfect because I also wanted to mention this project for collaborative coding by Moonshaker, who's a coder also based in Argentina, who made a tool for being able to collaborate with music and visuals called Flock. And so maybe I will share this link as well. Oops, I think it didn't let me open it here. Let's see. Oh, here it is. Okay, so I'm going to share this link also. There was a question of how did I spread the word about Hydra? When I made it, I wasn't intending to make something that other people would use at all. But that a bit happens with the internet sometimes, where you share something and then people take it in different directions. And I had just made it to give a workshop that was in Morelia, Mexico. And then the people who were in the workshop wanted to keep using it, and then they shared it. But I should mention that like there have been people doing this sort of live coding thing, especially with music, for a long time. And so there's kind of small pockets of people in different places who like to write their own code to make music and to make visuals. And so one place where that community is especially strong is in Latin America in general, but in Mexico specifically. And so I think because I did this first workshop there was a community of people who was already really interested in it. And so then they shared it with people who were already kind of really interested in this like nerd art music stuff. And so that was one reason I think why it spread really quickly. And so yeah, I wanted to mention this editor where that was made by someone in Argentina, Damien, and you can use these different languages, all kind of in the same editor. And this language, SCLang is this language called Super Collider that's for making music, and Tidal is one that a lot of people use for making music, that lets you kind of make musical patterns. And I really recommend that if you want to like jump into kind of a musical language. It's called Tidal Cycles, and I'll share a link to that also. And I think at DICE last year, Alexander Cardenas did a performance using Tidal as well. But anyways, here you could, like, let's say I just wanted to collaborate using Hydra, and I could give myself a name, and then I can join this. And then if I share this link here with anyone, so if you join this session, we will also all be able to collaborate together. Actually, I'm gonna, you can set it up so there's more than one editor at once. Let me see if this works. Oh yeah, so now there's like 2 text boxes. So I'm gonna share this link, this second link again. And so if you join here, then you'll see the 2. And so if I type something here, then you should see also, you should see that on your screen. And if you join, oop, that's fast. And if you join this link at all, you could, if you join this link as well, then you could also edit the code, or kind of write your own code in a different place. And so this is one way that people collaborate, doing these different things. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, I wanted to show recently, there's a group of people based in Indonesia and Peru, and they've been doing sort of collaborative performances. Oops, the sound. They've been doing sort of collaborative performances between Peru and Indonesia, using this editor and Hydra, as well as audio languages. And let me see, I think I forgot to share the audio of my computer when I did the share. So I'm going to, here, let me add share sound, and let me see if it lets me do it again. Okay. So this was a live stream that they did a month ago. And I'll just show this because I thought this one was especially, oh wait. This one was especially nice because you could see their faces. And I want to, I think I'm going to share the link to this if you're interested. There was this is just one specific performance where they use Hydra in different music languages. And then there was also, this is the link to like the whole live stream that was a group of people, again, I think it was Peru, Costa Rica, and Indonesia. And there's kind of different groups in different parts of the world using this word algo rave to denote live coded music and visuals, and especially recently the group in Indonesia has been really active as well, which is exciting to see. So I'm going to share this link also in the here. I think it's a bit hard. I think it's a bit hard to see like in my YouTube then restreaming it then over the Zoom. So it's probably best to just click on the link to see that. Yeah, and so this was made using this collaborative editor Flock and using Hydra along with Tidal Cycles, which is this language for live coding music. And there's also for more kind of information about live coding in general, there's this, it's doing this to me. Oops. There's this website called Top Lap, that's like laptop backwards. That's been around for like, I think like 20 or 30 years. And there's some things of people doing live coding in different places. And one thing that I appreciate about this is one, all the tools are free. They don't all run in your browser. Sometimes it's complex installation processes, and the community is pretty welcoming in a lot of things, especially in that if you're a beginner and you're just trying something out, like people are very supportive of like creating a space for you to perform or try out things, especially every year. Alex McLean, who sort of started this Top Lab, has a live stream where anyone who wants to do a live coded performance from wherever they are can just join the live stream. And so it went from being kind of 24 hours long to 48 hours to 72 hours, because people just sign up for different slots, different half-hour slots, and from wherever they are can just live stream their desktop. And this was all happening before the pandemic. And it's kind of nice because like there aren't necessarily large groups of people in person who are interested in this in any one place, but then online, wherever you are, you could meet other people. Yeah, and another thing is that you could use Hydra directly within a website. So, and it doesn't have to fill the whole screen this way, but you could kind of use the code that you try out within the editor. There's a library, so you can use it kind of as part of a website. And so some of the people who were sharing things in this group are using Hydra more as part of like a website that they're making. Or here you can see this little thing on the side was from a Hydra sketch. And to me, I like this kind of like creating spaces to have this sort of like DIY things on the internet, or create DIY spaces where it's not necessarily the most polished, like responsive corporate website or something, but have like a set of links of people who've just created a little website or a little performance and want to share it with other people. And I will show a little bit because I will show a little bit of kind of the musical collaboration side of this. And for me, after I made this, I started being invited to perform live. And then I realized that Hydra was also good for performances. And so I'm going to just show a few like things from that. And I'm going to mute myself. Let me know in the chat if the audio is working. And something I've really, for myself, that I've discovered is I like improvising a lot. And I think kind of creating a system where I kind of know enough about the tools that I roughly know what will happen, but also where I'm not fully sure what will happen. And so I think I'm new to music and I'm learning just a lot about improvisation and how other people improvise. But that has been really inspiring to me because before this, I've been a programmer, and a lot of more traditional ways of programming, you're supposed to kind of plan everything out ahead of time and create a software that only has one way of using it. And there's users of the software and they're, allowed to click this button or that button, or, maybe they can do this slider. But the idea of code is this like kind of constant dialogue, and that you can constantly create and reconfigure the software. I think it's really exciting because it also changed how I approach programming. It can also be a bit like too open-ended sometimes, where you can just change everything or mess everything up live, which maybe can add some excitement, but also some stress to things. And so this was an example where actually like what you see on the screen is like just actually my text editor and kind of the cursor and feedback from that. And I was collaborating with a cellist in Mexico City. And I think we're getting towards the end. And this the reason I wanted to show a bit of live performance, and also I also did a performance in a planetarium in Bogota a year and a half ago, and that was kind of just really incredible because it's like the entire planetarium and 8,000 pixels by 8,000 pixels. And I wanted to mention that a bit because I think sometimes people dismiss things that like run in the browser or things that are free as like, oh, it's just a toy, or like that's fun to learn a little bit, but it's not like a professional or a real creative software. And sometimes within creative software, there's this idea that like, oh, if it doesn't look like a control room, like I don't know, like with lots of options, if the software doesn't look like that and doesn't cost like over $100, then it's not like a real software. You aren't a real visual person, or a real musician or something if you don't use X software or Y software. And definitely like software that you pay for or has certain like maybe more stability guarantees and stuff. But I think to me, I really love, people like making tools and sharing them with each other, or some just like smaller apps that can do one thing really well. And this kind of like being able to just play around with something, and like that the same tool that I could teach to like 6-year-olds could also be a quote professional software, because like what is a professional software? And so now with the last 15 minutes, I guess if people have questions about anything, I would love to hear your comments, questions, thoughts. That's all really welcome. Or if going back to the code, also, if there's something you're like, oh, could you do this or that? Feel free to ask here. There was a question earlier that was, is there video synthesis software? And there's a lot of different types of video oriented software. I think there's one of the more common ones for doing kind of live or complex visuals now is called Touch Designer. There's like older things like Pure Data and Max MSP that work with audio, or also visuals. There's I'm trying to think what other video types of software. There's a kind of like video synthesis app called Lumen, but it only runs on Mac, I believe, but it kind of simulates this modular idea. And so in some ways, it's the most similar to Hydra. Who are my favorite visual artists right now is one of the questions. I really like people who sort of experiment with what different like new technologies have to offer. One of my favorite visual artists right now is her name is Danielle Braithwaite Shirley, and she's a game developer and Black trans woman, and like develops a lot of games like from that perspective, and that kind of like challenge social norms about what games can be. And so off the top of my head, maybe because I just saw her work in person for the first time, and I've been like excited for a while, so maybe that's one of my favorite visual artists right now. But maybe it's an expanded definition of visual. But yeah, if I think of more, I think I'm inspired by a lot of other artists, and I will put them in the chat as well as I think of them. I think with the webinar format, it's probably best for me to like take up the entire time. So seeing as it doesn't seem like there's more questions right now, I will go ahead and play this planetarium video also. The little thing like shooting through the sky is actually my cursor. So this is just my screen like large. Yeah, and as I mentioned before, you can use Hydra inside a web page with like, and you can use it with any other web technology that you might use. So like with this is a demo page that I will also share the link to in the pad of how to use Hydra in a web page. And yeah, people have used it in lots of different ways, and the forum is probably the best place to find more information about that. And I really like it, like people share examples a lot. And I like thinking of like, I guess supporting in whatever ways I can people who want to like share different things with others. Oh yeah, and there's this, there's a collaborative editor that I made also called Pixel Jam, where you can just log in and anonymously edit the same canvas, basically. That's like split into 3 channels. Yeah, and people, it's been interesting. I've seen people just kind of collaborate with for hours because you can just be there without knowing each other or without kind of setting it up ahead of time. Unlike the other collaborative editors that I showed where you have to, what was I gonna say? You have to kind of like share with someone and have a private like collaboration session. It's just open. And so I've seen people kind of like go to the website and like just start making stuff with each other and then share. And then after that, like meet each other through other, like through Instagram or something. And yeah, you can actually see in here people like type in the comments of the code because you can only actually type code into it. You can't type anything else. But through the comments, you could share. Oops. Yeah, that's what I showed. One thing that I've been interested in lately also is kind of using visuals to control sound. And so this is actually go back to this one. This is just my using the changes in pixels to trigger samples. But yeah, one thing I like about creating software is like being able to do all these weird things. I'm just going to show this video and see what happens. yeah, I mean, that was just very basic, like drum samples. And I think, but what was interesting to me is like putting these different languages sort of in conversation with each other of the camera and physical space and the visual language and the sound language. And I'm just learning a lot about sound, but I'm like very visual. And so the more I kind of like see things happening, then it resonates with me. And this was basically the same idea where the colors of each of these pixels generates a pattern. But in this case, I sent that pattern to someone else whose name is Alex McLean, who created this music programming language. And so he was using that pattern as a sequence for music. And this is kind of something I'm more exploring lately. And we're almost out of time, so I'll just show this and then say goodbye to everyone. And that's all. Thanks everyone for coming. If you're interested in kind of continuing this, I really hope, especially for people in Berlin, like I hope at some point to have kind of like in-person meetups to like, or like hack and learn about stuff. And so, yeah, if you're interested in that, maybe like let Dice know, and they could let me know so I could include you in future things around this. And I also believe there's a workshop about tidal cycles, which is this language for live coding music. I think coming up soon with a festival called Radical Sounds Latin America. And so I can also share the information to that in the pad. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for joining today.